so on and so forth. This comes completely and strictly and purely out of this man's wonderful imaginative soul. So this, being an early Marcelino, is just a pure expression of guilt and fear. Now, you got to understand, this is real fear, because you're sure that these people are going to come back from the dead and punish you. And Marcelino was apparently guilty of not just your everyday sin. If he isn't half of what he was cracked up to be as a polysexual, cross-dressing, transvestite, alcoholic, what do we want to call him, nymphomaniac, then, you know, then he had a lot to be fearful of. So, a classical Mexican demon will have come out of the underworld to cause you to do this thing wrong. It wasn't you, but it was a demon that did it. There's other types of Ocumicho ceramics that are Pepsi trucks being driven by demons and buses being driven by demons, because in the back is some poor woman who really didn't want to have sex with a guy, but the demon made her do it, so it's a demon. Look how monstrous this guy is from the start. I mean, his nose is way up here. Ah, what a snout he's got. But here he sticks this little salamanderish guy right on here. Or maybe it's a copperhead snake, I don't know. But something happened, you know, so he had to bring the snake or the salamander demon out. So now I'll turn him around. Because look at, here's the devil incarnate. Look at the horns. Of course, this guy's... So front and back, he has to protect Marcelino in every way. And look at this guy. God knows what Marcelino must have done. And you've got to understand that his palette here is so vivid and so varied. Later on it gets a lot more uniform and prettier. You know, this is raw fear and guilt. And that's why it's so bright. It's still got some of Marcelino. This is a true eccentric and enigmatic human being. And this probably is his greatest single work. It's certainly the greatest one I've ever seen. I don't know really what to call them, and nor does anybody else. And they're made entirely out of the earth around Ocumicho, which lent itself to clay and to building with clay. They're entirely hand-built. They're heavy as hell because they're thick as hell because they're entirely hand-built. They're almost all made with fingers, and then little sticks and so on were used to sort of mold them. And it's generally true of any great art form that the state of the art is reached early on in the history of that form, and then it sort of levels out. So it was with Marcelino. I think his guilt must have crescendoed sometime early, and he made maybe 5 colossal monsters. This is the heaviest and biggest one I know of, and it has the most work on it, because like any great sculpture, it has to be appreciated from 360 degrees. But on this little base, which is, these are classical paints, by the way. These are not pigments, generally used in clay. And I better say, first of all, Marcelino would build this out of the red clay. And we might tilt it back a little bit to show the base, first of all. That's the natural color of the clay. And this, by the way, is a typical Marcelino base in that it was way too fragile to hold the weight of the central object, so it broke in firing, because he would do a little bisque firing first to harden the clay, and all of his bases cracked, and he'd go back in and he'd just repair the cracks, and then refire it, and then he would paint over it. And then after that he would use a varnish, which would be probably some Mexican version of Comac household varnish, yellowish varnish, all of which is perfectly fit for this kind of a sculpture. And God knows, I don't think there was really a self-conscious bone in his body in the context of art history, and so on and so forth. This comes completely and strictly and purely out of this man's wonderful imaginative soul. No self-consciousness about the value of his art or his expressions or anything, artistically or aesthetically. And it's intact. His biography must be incredible. It would probably be way too good for any movie, and would make the biographies of other renegades that took Mexico on as a cause célèbre, like B. Traven, who wrote Treasure of the Sierra Madre, look tame. And all these other enigmas we've heard about in Mexico, Mexico being the place for enigmas to go, you know, in the early 20th century and the late 19th century. One thing that's absolutely true about a lot of great art, especially, I guess, since formality got taken out of art, per se, let's say in the late 19th century, is how the child stays so alive in the expressions of, and the artist himself, in all great artists of the time I just mentioned, like Picasso, who said it best, and whom I paraphrase when I say what he said, that it took him about 5 years to learn to paint like Titian and a lifetime to paint like a child. And Marcelino's child was always alive in him. Of all the things I've ever seen of Marcelino's, this is his Rosetta Stone. It's got all the elements of all of his great art and all the other great art that came out of Ocumicho. It's got the palette, the figures, and so on. And there's nothing like it. The Mexican government finally had to come in and prevent these people from making certain types of sculpture. And they bribed them by paying them to make patriotic Mexican sculpture. Pancho Villa and Zapata and so on. And that's what ruined the whole... Then the school just fell flat. Mm-hmm. Are we still on? Mm-hmm. Good. Elaine Horwich herself, she was a great art collector, and she got Stanley Marcus into collecting this stuff. He was one of her great patrons. And so the Marcus collection of Mexican folk art, probably in private hands, is far and away the greatest. It was greater far than Nelson Rockefeller's was. All the same, the best book on Mexican folk art ceramics is written by Annie O'Neill, who was Rockefeller's personal curator of his collection and helped start the museum in San Antonio. I've never sold a lot of them. I've always been a little bit too attached to them to sell them. In fact, the first time I ever sold a Marcelino was to Reed, and it was this one. And it was only like to friends that I would let a lot of them go. At any rate, Elaine, after Marcelino's decease, talked some of Marcelino's family members into taking on pottery, and they did quite well, and they made quite a number of really fine things as well, and got their imaginations into it, though none of them will rival anything like this. And they were his nieces, and I think one nephew. And then their children went on to make pottery, and it was their children who made the pottery of the patriotic figures, about which also there are books written. And it was there, and then, which was probably about 10 years ago, that the ceramic school of Ocumicho essentially died. They're still making things, but that's what happens at any art school. And maybe something will resurrect there. The Medrano family over in San Juan de la Huerta, they're making copies of things that their grandfathers made. So that's what happens to all of them. But we should stay tuned and try to develop more information on Marcelino, because you couldn't make it up and have it be probably half as interesting as the true story of Marcelino would be. Elaine died herself tragically after she and her husband Arnie built the great El Dorado Hotel out of the old De Vargas Hotel site there in Santa Fe. Her husband Arnie called me one day, and he couldn't live with these things, and knew that I liked Marcelino. And so I drove all the way down to Paradise Valley, Arizona, where these great things reposed in a dark room, and packed them all up and drove them back here. I was moderately uncomfortable a few times driving back with all these things in the van with my old addiction, and would have to just make myself drive through it and then laugh and talk to Marcelino in the back and tell him why I wasn't going to stop and have a drink of tequila, even though I knew there would be probably a really good bar right over there, wherever that was. At any rate, got them all home. You listen, they'll talk to you.
Two of them are in our bedroom.
Wonderful. Oh, that's perfect.